It's good to see everyone who has made the effort to come out again and gather with us here tonight in Bray. It's a milder night, so it's easier on the roads. I probably should, just to be humble, I probably should make a small apology. I did discover afterwards, when I went home last night and checked the video and everything else, I discovered that I had overdone my time a little. And I promised the saints that if they came every night, I wouldn't abuse the clock. Last night was the longest meeting. It wasn't supposed to be. Not that we didn't have a lot of material, because we have a lot of material every night. But I discovered, actually, I reset my watch manually on Saturday night, and I was doing it with a mind on other things, and my watch was about 7 minutes off. It was off in the wrong direction. So last night when I was sitting down, it was 1:30 on my watch. So there you go. You can take that as an excuse or not. My watch is fixed, so there's no excuse tonight. Let's do what we have been doing in previous nights. It's not just to raise your eyebrows. This is done with good intent. And I think it's been helpful. Let's turn to a passage in the Old Testament, which then would be maybe relatively strange, not a passage that we would normally go to, but then we find that it fits in with some of these things that we are studying here. Our topic tonight is the 7 bowl judgments. We did the seal judgments way back a number of nights ago. The 7 seals opened. We saw that as being a legal picture, the law book of eternity, the title deeds of the universe, the infringements that have been committed, the penalties that can be exacted, and the sections of the book that can be unrolled by the person who has the authority to open the book, that the judgments might be poured out. We saw coming out of that then the trumpet judgments. Well, you ask me, is it 7 real angels? Do they blow 7 real trumpets? I don't see any reason why not. It could be symbolic, but we could find, because we will be in heaven seeing it happen, we'll find that before we get to the end of the book of Revelation. I'd have no difficulty believing it will be 7 real angels blowing 7 heavenly trumpets. They might not be heard on earth, but I think as we move from seals to trumpets, we'll find that men on earth are becoming more aware that this is not just cosmic disturbance. It's not just global warming. It's not CO2 pollution. It's not all these other things that we're told about today. No, this is actually God in heaven that they don't believe in. Putting his finger down through the heavens and saying, you know, pay attention, because I'm starting to move heaven and earth and warn men about judgment. And then last night we got to the very center point of the chart, and we discovered that in spite of all the warnings that God is giving, there is going to be men, and they're going to be on purpose, deliberately, without deception. They're going to voluntarily, in fact, there's going to be men, they're going to rush to the front rank. They're going to say, I want it first. We had quite a bit of discussion last night, even some afterwards, about what the mark actually was. I said some things I didn't say on the platform. That's fine. But we talked a little bit about the 666 and the mark of the beast. And then tonight we're coming to the third set of judgments, the bowls. I did say last night, I think the bowl judgments are slightly different in terms of time, where the trumpets and the seals begin to some degree in the first half of the 7 years. Though they all finish at the end of the 7 years, I think that we will be quite clear here in Scripture that the bowl judgments all come in the second half of the 7 years, after this man has been seen as the man of sin, after his covenant has been broken, after the tyranny and martyrdom has broken out. Then God is going to begin to bring forth his judgments, not only on men who have taken the mark. As we move through our chapter tonight, we'll find that God is, and again our judgments will divide into a 4 and a 3, and we're going to see that God is going to target actually the very center of the kingdom of Antichrist himself. And then tomorrow night, when we've that done, we're going to go and look at Babylon. I haven't said a word about this thing away up here. You've been thinking about that picture. What on earth is that? Well, it looks very different from that one over there. We'll say no more. That's your taster for tomorrow night. We're going to look at Babylon. 2 cities, not that one and this one. No. 2 cities, Babylon, that we have here in Revelation chapter 17 and 18. Job chapter 38. A mighty, mighty, mighty book. One of the hardest books to understand in the whole of the Old Testament. We're coming near the end of Job. All these shallow men with preconceived ideas as to why they thought that Job was sick. And mind you, Job was absolutely within himself. Job was sincere that in his heart he hadn't sinned against God. He was trusting God even though he had no understanding of what God was bringing him through, for even his own wife had turned against him. And then his best friends came to comfort him, and all they did was slander him. The poor man was broken-hearted. And Jehovah, when he'd sat long enough in heaven listening, then he broke into the conversation and he closed the whole thing down. He said, "You boys be quiet, because now God's going to talk." And then the last little part of the book, it's actually God conversing with Job. The end of the book is absolutely tremendous. Been such a comfort to so many saints down through the years. God blessed the latter end of Job more than at the beginning, and gave him as many flocks and herds as he had lost, and gave him another 7 sons and 3 daughters. In actual fact, just on an aside, God doubled the number of animals that he had at the start. But he gave him 7 sons and 3 daughters. Oh, you say, why did he not double that? Because, you see, that's different. That's not animals, that's humans. His 7 sons and 3 daughters died, but they were souls in heaven. So he had 14 sons and he had 6 daughters, even though 10 of them were gone. But God doubled the number of animals to him. Job chapter 38, in verse number 22, God's talking to Job and explaining about his own greatness and what he's going to do in the future. Job, don't mind about yourself. Get the vision bigger, a wee bit like John. Look at the big thing, Job. Hast thou considered, entered into the treasures of the snow? Hast thou seen the treasures of the hill, which I have reserved against the time of trouble and against the day of battle and war? You say, what? Hail? Yeah, I get that. Treasures of hail. What's this? Warehouses filled with hail against the day of battle and war. That doesn't make sense. By what way is the light parted? What scattered the east wind unto the earth? Who divided the water course for the overflowing of waters, or a way for the lightning of thunder to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is? On the wilderness where there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth. Does the rain have a father? Who hath begotten the drops of the dew, out of whose womb came the ice, and the hoary frost of heaven? Who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone. The face of the deep is frozen. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades? That's a constellation. Or loose the bands of Orion? That's another constellation. Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinance of the heavens? God's saying, listen, Job, look up there and see the stars. You don't know all their names. But let me tell you this, I gather them all into little bunches, and I guide them about just with the very breath of my mouth. 1 minute God's talking about little tiny hailstones, and the next minute he's talking about constellations. You see, God works on scales that we can't imagine. We can work with feet and inches and multiply that up and get to yards and all the rest of it and get to miles. And maybe even some of us are able to swap a little bit between meters and kilometers and yards and all the rest of it, and we don't get too confused. I grew up and crossed over, so I can kind of work with both. You know, but there's still limitations in, you know, how we can think, isn't there? You know, a joiner, he works, some of them still work in thousands, you know, some of the joiners. Thousands of inches. So they do. They don't want to be metric in their fine measurement. But you see, a man that's surveying and a civil engineer, he's not working to thousands. No, that wouldn't be suitable. He wants to see a 6-lane highway going down through the wilderness. And he knows thousands and millions of tons that earth has to be excavated. He can see it all with his eye in advance. And if you went and looked at a plan, you'd say, I've even no idea where it's going to go. Sure, here's the old road here. What on earth are they going to do? It takes them 3 or 4 years and then it's done. Oh, you say, now I can't remember where the old road was, but this is great that there's no corners anymore. Right, but you see, our God's a God of the small scale, and our God's a God of the massive scale. Our God, he doesn't need any scale. And yet so often in his word, he has opened the curtains of heaven, and he's given us the scale of earth time to match against the scale of eternity. Now, there's certain things he doesn't tell us on purpose. He hasn't given us the date when he's going to take the Christians home. I think we've seen very, very clearly why he hasn't given us that date. And so from that date, we have not seen when the seal book will be opened. We have not seen when the 7 years will start. But once they do start, they'll be able to count them down, 1, 2, 6 naught days twice, right to the very end of tribulation. And then Daniel actually tells us, we'll read that verse in a night to come, the little tiny bridging gap between the end of tribulation and the start of the kingdom, and the kingdom lasts for exactly 1,000 years. God reaches down through heaven, and he scales so many things out in earth time, our time that we understand. Revelation chapter 16. And verse number 1. So we're in the bowls tonight. And I heard a great voice out of the inner temple. That's the sanctuary word, saying to the 7 angels. Here's another 7. Another 7 of angels. 7, 7, and 7. That's 3 sevens. Go your ways and pour out the bowls of the wrath of God upon the earth. And the word is bowl. I know in the King James Bible it says vial. And when I did some chemistry very badly at school until I could get rid of it quick enough, a vial was a wee tiny thing that they dripped certain dangerous fluids out of. No. It is a bowl. That's the word in the original language. A serving bowl. You say, but if I want to target something very, very, very carefully, I would pour it out from a little tiny narrow neck flask. Yeah, so would I. But this is God at work. God's directing his angels. God can send an angel to pour from a bowl, and yet God can cause the thing to be targeted to within a heavenly inch. The first angel went and poured out his bowl upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and them which worshipped his image. We'll do it slightly differently tonight. Rather than reading down through the whole chapter, we'll just take each bowl as it comes, and then we'll comment on it. Here's the first of the 7. What's happening here? The words in the original, because Greek and Hebrew, those languages are more pictorial in their words than English is. Contaminating and eroding. Ulcerating and stinking. All of that is contained within these 2 words. Upon them which had, well, that's why we're absolutely certain, you see, that we're in the second half. Them which had received the mark of the beast. They've been parading themselves around, you know, showing off their mark. And whatever way it's going to operate, and whatever way the mark, I was saying in private conversation last night, I'm happy to say this in public, I think the mark will be constructed in such a manner that not only will it be an identifier with Antichrist, but it will be like what the people that came through the Holocaust had on their arm. Every single numeric will be in a variation. so that we'll identify individual people as well as identifying them with Antichrist. And of course, we'll discover as we get over into chapter number 18, we'll get there tomorrow night, that even if Antichrist does not have a fully global empire, I know the early Bible interpreters and scholars, they believed that. J. N. Darby believed that. A friend of mine, he knew what I was talking about last week, and he sent me up some photographs. He'd been to a library over in Manchester. He was allowed to take some pictures. He asked for permission. He studies the same kind of strange things as I do, and he took pictures of some things that had been gathered together in an exhibition. He knew I'd be interested, and he sent them across to me. One of them was a map suggesting the size of the empire of Antichrist, drawn in a way about 220 years ago or such. It encompassed the whole earth, America to China. I don't think so. I don't think that Antichrist is ever going to have a fully global empire. I think he's going to start with his core empire and his 10 key monarchical supporters. We'll get that again tomorrow night, who will probably be mostly Central European, Mediterranean based. It will possibly widen out from that. I see no reason why it has to be the Roman Empire revived, nor the G10, nor the 27 of the EU. No, those are just foreshadowings. I think there will be Middle Eastern kings in the mix, maybe even in the 10. I think his empire will get broader, but I think the influence of his empire will extend greatly. Because it becomes very obvious when you go into chapter number 18, we're going to go there tonight, that there is actually not only a purchasing embargo, that's you getting groceries for your family, but there's a trading embargo. Nobody can buy or sell anything or trade unless they have the mark. So there could be manufacturers in China, let's say. There's plenty of them anyway nowadays. They might not be within the remit of the empire of Antichrist. But if they want to sell stuff through a middleman, a broker, to the empire of Antichrist, he has to be a man who comes and bows before him and takes the mark. If he doesn't do that, the stuff can't arrive to be sold in the empire of Antichrist. The Scripture is absolutely clear on that. There is no doubt. Anybody who wants to have anything to do with the kingdom of Antichrist at this point in time, in the center of the 7-year period, this is now not only an empire, this is not only political, this is religious as well, this is infernal and demonic. There's nothing else left. It's do business with me and worship me. And if you don't do that, you'll either starve or die. So hundreds of thousands of millions of people will come and take the mark on their forehead, and take the mark on the back of their right hand, and maybe even the fanatics, I suggested last night, will maybe even get branded in their eye. And then we arrive at Revelation chapter 16 and verse number 3. What's happening here? The mark actually ulcerates of itself. It's like some kind of future leprosy. And it's coming from the very mark. Be it forehead mark, be it eye mark, be it hand mark. I don't know what kind of medical services will exist in these days, but they'll be running off to the doctors if such things exist. They'll be saying, take it off. Cut it out. Give me an antidote. Give me an injection. And they'll say, there is no cure. Nothing can be done. This was not medicine. This was not of man. This was of God. And people will say, oh, but we've bowed before him. He's God. And then people will begin to realize, no, he's not God. That's an awful lie. There is a real God in heaven. And the very condemnation of bowing before this other God is the fact that the God of heaven is going to actually make the mark itself a cancer. It's going to contaminate from the outside in. Verse number 3. The second angel poured out his bowl upon the earth. Upon the sea, sorry. And it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. It actually carries the thought of it became as the blood of everything dead. Every living soul in the sea died. Not a single thing left alive in the oceans. No point in going fishing. No fishing boats. Either fishing by the sea to feed yourself if you're living in famine conditions, or commercial fishing either, if that still exists, because every single thing in the sea will be dead and the seawater itself will be contaminated. They're actually, you see, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. But there's little, God paints pictures in advance, you know. Just we keep going back to the plagues in Egypt, don't we? Oh, you say, and the Nile River became blood, you know, and what was in the river died, and the people who had taken their water from the river before Moses turned the river into blood, when they went back and checked in the buckets in their house that they'd taken from the river before Moses turned it into blood, but that water turned into blood too. And I'll tell you something else you maybe never noticed. The magicians were able to do the same as Moses. Now, that could have been sleight of hand. That could have been a die up their sleeve, you know. Of course it could have been. But I'll tell you what they couldn't do. They couldn't make the bloody water clean. Only God could do that. That's back in Exodus chapter 9 or so. Go and look it up. But you see, there are pictures, even down through time, even past the end of the New Testament, working through into our ages. And if you go and look it up, if I was talking to young folk only, I would say Google it. I love telling young folk that. They're not sure if I'm talking sense, and then they go and Google it, and then they say, oh, Dave, you were right. That's always good, you know. You go and look up when you go home, if you like, you young folk. Go and look up either dinoflagellates or dinoflagellation. You say, what's that? It's microscopic organisms in the sea. And they swim about in billions. Too small to be noticed. Probably get filtered through the teeth of the whales. And they swarm all over the oceans of the world. And nobody knows the reason why. Sometimes, occasionally, they turn up in warm coastal waters, into the shallows, because they're deep ocean little microorganisms. And billions of them die at once. And people in Indonesia, people in the Philippines, people in California, it's happened there at least once, they call it the red tide, because the sea appears to be blood. And they've gone experimentally and they've caught fish from out of the water that is red. And the fish itself is actually, even when they cook it, the fish itself is actually poisonous. So nothing from the sea can be eaten if it's contaminated by dinoflagellation. That's just a tiny picture. God's going to do that right across the absolute totality of planet Earth. The third angel poured out his bowl upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord. That's the Jehovah word, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. Tribulation saints. Church saints, that we are not instructed to cry for vengeance. We are instructed to accept persecution gladly. And then back into Old Testament saints. that were permitted to ask for vengeance. You see, the poor disciples, they sat a little interim period. They weren't sure whether to look back or look forward. That was part of their confusion. James and John said, Lord, that village has rejected you. Can we call down fire just the way Elijah and No. Jesus said, don't do that. If they don't receive the gospel, just shake off the dust of your sandals and move on. But no, don't call down fire on your enemies. And accept persecution gladly if it comes. You see, where did persecution start? Where did it begin? And you shouldn't have to struggle to answer that question. If you've been following me, or if you've been attending all the meetings, you should know persecution started with Abel. Just about 30 or 40 years, maybe not any more than that. Down the road from the second generation, by the time they got to adulthood, a man who believed in God and sacrificed to Jehovah was murdered by his brother. That was the beginning of it. Not only the beginning of murder, but the beginning of persecution, the beginning of martyrdom. For the man only died for one reason. He died because his sacrifice was acceptable and his brother hated him for it. And that's going to continue right until the very beginning of the kingdom, right down through the ages of time. And there's periods in there where men, because of their grace, never ask for vengeance. And those of us who are in the church period were told not to ask for vengeance. Oh, you say, but look at all the people that were persecuted in the Middle Ages. Look at the people that are being persecuted today. Persecution might come in the West. God knows that. It's all squared away here, as the Americans would say, because when we get to this verse here, when we get into the bowl judgments, God is going to bring vengeance on every single person that ever persecuted any single child of God, ever. That even goes back to the drowning of the baby boys in the River Nile in the land of Egypt. Every single person that ever suffered for their faith in Jehovah or their faith in Jesus Christ, God is going to bring vengeance on their enemies. And that's what they're saying here. Thou art righteous, O Jehovah, which art and wast and shalt be the eternal God. Thou hast judged thus accordingly, because they shed the blood of saints and prophets. He poured out his bowl upon the rivers and the fountains of water. Just stop there for a second and think about it. Seas and oceans turned to blood. Rivers turned to blood. Fountains, springs, and aquifers and the hills all turned to blood. You say, okay, I get that. No, it's the wrong way around. No. The aquifers and the springs and the hills turn to blood, and they run down the rivers, and they turn to blood, and they run into the seas, and the seas go into the ocean until the blood gets to Antarctica. No, God does it the other way around. So that even men on earth that don't want to believe on God have to understand this is unnatural. This is, as the old Egyptian magician said, this is the finger of God. I'll tell you this, they said that through clenched teeth, but they said it. This is the finger of God. And mankind, with their subterranean sores and all the other things that's going on here, at the end of the bowl judgments, and the world's still in half darkness, don't forget, the darkness that came at the trumpet judgments, it's still there, multiplying judgment upon judgment. Now they're going to discover right here that God has poisoned all the water in the world, but he's done it in reverse. And they're going to realize it only could be done by a creator. I'll tell you this, the wee book that we have here that we've been talking about, and a page or two on that, it argues the very laws of physics, you know. The very basic laws of biology written down by intelligent men, most of them Christians, searching with a sincere heart hundreds of years ago, and formulated laws that they said those must be the rules that planet Earth lives under. They were right, they were sincere and genuine, working with a true heart. And all those laws were set down. The laws of gravity and the laws of thermodynamics and all those other things. And then they came along and they brought in Hubble and Darwin and those guys. They brought in the laws, so-called, of evolution. educating young people nowadays and not even admitting that one set of rules totally and completely and oppositely denies the other. It's absolutely and totally and completely impossible. They tell the children in school, and the children aren't supposed to think, that chaos leads to order. Did you ever hear such utter and complete nonsense? I was discussing that with some students not so long ago in a city in the street, and they said to me, oh, but that's what they teach us in evolution. I says, well, go home and take a look at your own bedroom. Did you ever see chaos tending to order by itself? You know, and did you ever see order tending to chaos? Oh, yes. Well, that's different. You see, a thing that starts off orderly and is set in place with rules and regulations, once we start to interfere, it goes to chaos. The law of entropy times arrow. Degeneration built into the very system and DNA of humanity. Why? Because we're fallen sinners. We can't even help it. We're just wrecking and contaminating and polluting the very place that God put us on in a perfect environment years ago. And I'll tell you, God's getting to the point where he's had enough. The fourth angel, verse 8, poured out his bowl upon the sun, and power was given unto him. Now, there's a wee textual difficulty here. Is it the sun that had the power, or was it the angel that had the power to adjust the thermostat of the sun? I'm not sure. It could be either. To scorch men with fire, and men were scorched with great heat, and they blasphemed the name of God, which had power over these plagues. And they repented not to give him glory. That's all 4 plagues that have passed already. These men are atheistic. Now, most evolutionary believers and teachers are also atheistic. That's why one thing supports the other, you see. Once you believe in the existence of a God who is outside the material universe, then you have to believe in a creation that he made. If you deny the creation that God made and said the Big Bang happened and the slime made itself and frogs and tadpoles turned into men and all the rest of it, even though not one single fossil of one missing link has ever been found. No. Oh, fossils of things that aren't here in our time, yes. Prehistoric animals, of that there is no doubt, yes. There are no pterodactyls flying in the sky above Shetland, no. And I wouldn't want to meet a Tyrannosaurus Rex walking down the street in Lerwick. Neither would you. They were real. We'll not go into the reasons why they were the kind of shape they were. That's another story. But I'll tell you this. They would give anything if they could find. And most of the things that they've even pretended to produce, as far as mankind is concerned, is just lies. They would give anything if they could find proof of a missing link. A half-half. Something halfway between. Something to prove that something was evolving from one kind of species to another. It's impossible. It never happened. And it can't happen. And the scripture tells us, 1 Corinthians 15, and Peter, and Jude, that God actually has put a tremendous condemnation. That's part of the judgment of angels, mind you. God has put a tremendous condemnation on any species that attempts to cross the species barrier. That's a big subject. And it's not in the remit of these meetings. That would take a whole specialist section by itself if you could think about it. It's one of the reasons for the immensity and enormity of judgment upon fallen angels. We looked at that at the trumpets, and we'll see it again before we get to the end. It's the reason for the existence of the pit of the abyss. Because there is no greater sin than to leave the order of creation that God made you to be in and to seek to move and change and alter and go somewhere else. And when that happens, God stops it, but he creates an awful condemnation for those that tried it. The 4th angel pours out his bowl upon the sun, and men who were agnostic, and men who were atheistic, and men who were unbelievers, and men who were God deniers, and men who were evolutionists. What are they going to do here? We're halfway through the 7 years. We're well into the second half of the second 42 months. They're going to start believing in God. Oh, you say, is that not good? No, it's not good, it's bad, because you see, they can't change, they've got the mark. They're going to believe in a God, but they're going to be beyond the point of redemption. That's divine justice. That's solemn, isn't it? I'm glad that we don't preach that in the day in which we live, and I don't believe it either. Harold S. Paisley, long gone, late of my hometown, Ballymena, he used to say, listen, there's a Christ for every sinner out of hell, and there's a hell for every sinner out of Christ. That's good, isn't it? That's rock solid. That's fundamental. There's no limited atonement in there. That's salvation for every soul that God gives another opportunity to by the call of the Spirit of grace in time. Mind you, that can be limited. It's not the atonement that's limited. No. You can't limit the infinity of the sacrifice of Christ. But God, by His infinite wisdom and purpose, can limit the movement of the Spirit of grace. I said on Sunday, God can be the God of the second chance, but He doesn't have to be. And when we get to this point here, every single man that has bowed and taken the mark, they have missed every single chance they ever had. There's no redemption, there's no salvation, there's no change. They're damned while they're living. And yet they're going to believe in a God that they're no longer able to trust in. That's solemn, isn't it? Power was given unto Him to scorch men with the sun. Don't forget, since the trumpet judgments, I think this is somewhere before the middle of the 7-year period. And people are going to get used to dwelling in this gloomy kind of up here north of Scotland darkness, only all over the whole world. They'll get used to very little sunlight. They'll get used to very little absorption of vitamin D in their system because the sun's not shining in every single climatic zone in the whole world. And then all of a sudden, even in these latitudes, the sun is going to come back to a apparent intensity that in some parts of the world has never been known before. And men are going to be sun-blasted and sunburned every single day, every time they go out the door. You know, when I step off the plane in Africa, I've done it quite a few times, and I'm hoping to do it again before the end of this year, God willing. Well, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? It's absolutely in the full expectancy of nature that, you know, that I expect it to get burned and blasted. You can't do anything about it. All I can do is just wear a big hat and, you know, put on some of the right kind of lotion, factor 50 or something. And I enjoy the heat, but I don't like the sun burning me. But, you know, this here, there's no respite from it. The sun is going to be turned up more intense than it ever has been before. And God is going to use the very power of the sun to plague the people that have the other plagues in these days of His great wrath. Little wonder it's called that. The day of His wrath. Do you remember that way back last week? One of the last verses in Revelation chapter 6. Right back here at the end of the seals. The chief men and the great men and the kings and the captains. I told you it's going to happen over here. The great day of His wrath. Hide us from the wrath of the Lamb. Who told them that phrase? Where did they learn that from? They learned it from the men who were preaching the gospel before they lost their heads. They learned it from the angel who was flying in the sky preaching the everlasting gospel. Repent while you've time, before you take the mark, before the great day of His wrath has come. For who shall be able to stand? The answer is nobody. Nobody. It's either Christ or Antichrist. I've said that so many times in the past weeks. Now, I said, watching the clock, I said at the beginning that all our judgments, actually, if you check them all, divide somehow or other, as most sevens in the Bible do, into an interesting 4 and 3. Not every seven. Some sevens divide in 5 and 2. Some sevens in the Bible divide 3 and 3 and 1 in the middle. You can think about that and go home and meditate on that, and you'll come up with an answer. I'm not going to supply that. But the 3 sets of judgments all divide somehow or other. I'm not saying there's a time division. I'm just saying when you read it carefully, you can see a little division, and something changes in relation to the second group, 4 and 3. The 5th angel, verse number 10, poured out his bowl where? Well, we've got the rivers, we've got the seas, we've got the oceans, we've got men that had the mark, we've the Son. Where now? Upon the throne of the beast. And his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed, chewed on their tongues for pain, and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pain and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. You say, is that symbolic language? No. Does the beast, he is a person, he is a man, he will set up his kingdom, he will have his coronation. We've touched on that so many times. I said last night, I didn't labor it, I didn't hammer it, and I wouldn't be dogmatic on it. The scholars, I admit, they're divided. Does the man have a pseudo-assassination and pretend to come back from the dead? And are people convinced by the spin doctor that that's what happened, so that in awe they bow before him? Or does the man die from wounds, assassination wounds, close in by one of his own? And maybe even the false prophet wounded too, but not mortal wounds. And then does the man come back from the other side, from the grave? Or is what comes back from the grave something just slightly other than a man? Everything on the outside looks exactly the same, possibly even still with wounds. Something on the inside, maybe just that little bit different. Does the man have a throne? I have no doubt whatsoever he does. Does he have actually a ruling center on this earth? I have no doubt. We'll look at that tomorrow night. Does he have a capital center, a capital of his kingdom? Yes, he does. Jerusalem will be the religious center for a time. When he breaks the covenant with Israel and stands in the holy place, we'll look at that tomorrow night, and you might be shocked at one or two of the things that come out there, but that's another story. He stands in the holy place and he says, no more worship of any kind, am God, worship me. And that's the very center point of the 7-year period. But I don't believe that his kingdom will be based politically or commercially in Jerusalem. And we'll come back to that tomorrow night. I think he's going to have a capital city. And I think if I asked you to guess between now and tomorrow night where his capital city is going to be based, I think you could probably have a fairly good stab at it. The throne of the beast and his kingdom. The 6th angel poured out his bowl, verse 12, upon the great river Euphrates. And the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings from the sun rising. I know it says from the east, but, well, you see, the sun rises in the east, but no, that's not the correct translation. You see, east of Jerusalem could be the Middle East. East of the Middle East could be Mesopotamia. East of Mesopotamia could be India, and so on and so forth. But these are kings from the rising of the sun. In other words, they are from as far away in the east as men live. And God is going to dry up the greatest, most symbolic river on earth and in the Bible. Not the Amazon, the Euphrates. It's drying up already. God's going to dry it up more. He's going to dry it up like the Red Sea. That was positive long ago. He's going to dry it up like the Jordan 40 years later. That was positive long ago. Now he's going to dry up the Euphrates. That's going to be negative. That's still in the future. Oh, you say, that's the 200 million men army. Careful now. Careful now. I told you way back last week now the 200 million army was demons. And demons don't need a dried up river to march across. No, no, no. The 200 million doesn't apply to here. And a lot of scholars get mixed up in the past, and I forgive them, for I'm wrong in some things too. And they said, oh, 200 million men, that's the China's army. Yeah, it could be 200 million men coming from China, but the 200 million in Revelation chapter 9 is not the army that's coming from the east here, because what we had in the trumpet judgments is a demonic army. What we have coming here is a human army. It's a different period. This is the first beginning of open international kingdom rebellion. Against who? Against the man who would love to have been king of the world. This is the start of, listen now, because we're going to come back to this again tomorrow night, and we're going to come back again the next night. This is the start of, oh, you see, they're saying World War III is in the doorstep. I read an article by Michael Snyder, a guy that I read his email newsletter fairly often. I'm quoting him. He said 2 weeks ago, we're on the doorstep of World War III and World War IV and World War V all been fought at once. That's terrifying, isn't it? I don't know how many world wars will be fought before the church goes home. You see, I was brought up on a day when they said none. I don't believe it anymore. We could see World War III before I get back home to Ireland. We could see World War IV before the end of this year. We could see World War V before the end of the decade, and the church still be on earth. This will be World War Nth. But you know what, dear brother and sister in Christ? It'll be World War last. It'll be the last World War. There'll never be another one. This is the start of it right here. The way of the kings from the rising of the sun will be dried up. He's going to look out his palace window someday. I don't know if God will do it at night. He dried up the Red Sea in a night. He dried up the Jordan in a night. Well, it maybe wasn't just the finger of God that dried up the Euphrates up there at the old city of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's capital, years ago in Daniel's day, but it was the machinations of some very clever men that the Babylonians hired in. And you know the story, don't you? They managed to work out a scheme whereby they could mechanically get the flow, because the Babylonians had actually caused the Euphrates around Nebuchadnezzar's city to have two sides. So the city was actually an island city. That was part of their additional protection, as well as walls 200 feet high. And of course, you see, the Medes that the Persians went to, and they said, you boys with the engineering strategies that we don't have, you have a far smaller army, but you're very, very smart. Would you come and help us? And we'll cut a deal with you, because if you come and help us and you are victorious, we'll let actually one of the Mede princes be the first king. What does it say? In that night was Belshazzar slain, and Darius the Mede reigned in his stead. It was the Persians who were coming in, but they allowed a Mede king to sit on the throne. Why? Because it was Mede engineering soldiers that worked out what to do. They went up and reversed all the dams. Now they managed to completely and totally, in the darkness of the night, drain all the water away from the eastern channel of the Euphrates River, and the soldiers were standing ready, and they actually crawled up the water channels and killed the men behind the gates and opened the gates, and then the army came in, and in the morning the whole of Babylon had been overtaken in the night. A river dried up just in a night. God's done it once. God's done it twice. God's done it 3 times. I don't even know how many more. He's going to do it here. The great river Euphrates will be dried up, maybe in a night. that the way of the kings from the rising of the sun will be prepared. I'll tell you this man and his henchman and their king Satan that they are serving, they're going to realize it straight away. Time's nearly up. There's a mighty marching army coming. I don't know if technology's still going to be around. I have a strange suspicion not. I don't know if cell phones and satellites will still be working. I have a strange suspicion not. I think it'll be ear to the ground and rumor. And then the confirmation that there is an insurrection coming will be the very fact that this God again they've all denied. The water in the river disappears, and they've no physical, no psychological. You know, there's nothing there between us and them, and we've heard a rumor that there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of them coming. That's the first move against him. Inside the whole of his kingdom period, he started off with this great reign of peace and all these kings supporting him, and not a man said a word against him, and half the world bowed down before him. And now the man's starting to be frightened in his very palace, and God's attacking his palace. And before he's finished, we better not go to Armageddon tonight, though Armageddon's in this chapter. We'll fight the battle of Armageddon another night. We'll do it in a different section, but Armageddon's in here. We'll read the verse before we finish. God's going to bring another army up from the south, you know, partial African. And God's going to possibly, I think, bring another army down from the north. And God's going to bring his loyal army, what's left of them, in from the west. And so you're going to have an eastern army, a northern army, a southern army, and a western army, and the Mediterranean Sea on the immediate west. And they're all going to be sitting just gathered right around the three sides of his kingdom. And then they're going to start to push. Daniel tells us that. Tidings out of the east, that's Daniel chapter 11, shall trouble him. And he will decamp from his capital city. And he will move his wartime general's tent, like Montgomery in the desert. He'll move it to the Sinai Peninsula. He'll say, oh, I'm on safe ground here. And the sea's beside me. And the desert is away down there. And Israel, I've conquered them long ago, and the Western army's loyal to me, and well, I've had to give up my capital city, but I'm safe here. And they're going to keep pressing. They're going to keep pushing until, in actual fact, the two of them, the beast and the false prophet, they're going to have to give in and be humiliated. They're going to have to go up through Israel, and they're going to have to get in among their own troops in Megiddo, because they're going to believe that there's nobody else that's loyal anymore. The armies have all come to rub them out. That's not the devil's plan, you know. The devil doesn't care about his men. The devil's servants are always expendable. Now, listen to that and get it in. Every person that bows before Christ is eternally safe, no matter what happens to them on earth. Every single person that worships Satan is eternally damned. But also, as far as their human life is concerned, they're totally expendable. Even they serve him on his side. He's no use for them as people. He's no time for them as humans. They're just tools. When he's finished with them, he throws them away. These men are only tools in Satan's hand, under the control of God. Because what Satan is interested in is not even the defeat of his two front men. You know what I'm going to say, don't you? Satan is interested in the total of annihilation of Israel. He's going to try it one time more. So if all these kings and all these boys tramp about all over the Middle East and all over the Mediterranean, there's not going to be, Jerusalem's going to be gone again for the last time. Verse number 15, behold, I come as a thief. Who's that? An army from the east, the north, the south, the west? No, 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 no. I'll tell you an Irish story before I stop. Nearly finished. 2 minutes. A wee fellow in Ireland, they say it's true, you know. A wee fellow in Ireland had been to a Sunday school somewhere. He'd heard the gospel. And his father wasn't an awful good boy. You know, he went and drunk beer at night and all the rest of it. And when he was short of money and short of stuff because he had drunk the wages, he went and he stole the praties, you see, from another farmer's field. You boys say tatties, don't you? Anyway, the wee boy was taken out one night with his father with a sack, you see. His father said, you do guard. Watch for anybody walking or horse or donkey cart. I'll go into the field. And if you see anything, you give an owl hoot or something like that, and I'll lie low and then I'll come back. So the father was halfway across the field, you see, and the wee boy gave the signal. And the father came back and he said, who's coming from where? From that way? No, the wee boy says, no. He says, this way? No. He says, anybody coming? No. He says, sure, you've looked every road, there's nobody coming. What did you bring me back for? Oh, the wee boy says, Daddy, but I learned enough at Sunday school to know this. You never thought to look up. He says, God sees it all, even in the darkness. Well, it might just be a wee Irish story, but it makes a good point, doesn't it? You see, these men here, behold, I come as a thief. Who's that? That's Christ. He's coming from the sky. He's coming from the clouds. So we'll have to throw all that together and we'll have to fight this 5-cornered battle in a night that's going to come. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. That's written to Christians, you know. And he, that's still Christ, gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And we'll not say any more about that tonight. The 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and there came a great voice from out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, it is completed, it is done. And there came voices and thunders and lightnings and a great earthquake, such as what was not since men were upon the earth. The present scale goes to 11. And the greatest earthquake in modern history on planet Earth, and all the great earthquakes on Earth, strangely enough, have been inside the last 40 or 50 years. The intensity is increasing, of that there is no doubt, of everything. We're in the last days. But the scale goes to 11. The greatest earthquake measured is 9.2. This one's going off the scale. God doesn't care about men's scales. I said that at the start. God works to his own scale. The greatest earthquake that ever was. And the great city was divided, that's Jerusalem, into 3 parts. And the cities of the nations fell. You say how many? All of them. Tokyo, Singapore, Berlin, Paris, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, London, Dublin, Edinburgh, the whole lot. If they're still standing. Every single city in the world flattened in a second. Except 2 cities left on earth standing. Jerusalem. Shaken but not gone. And Babylon still standing. Waiting for her final destruction. That's all that will be left at that point in time. And great Babylon came into remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled, and the mountains were not found. That's a description of the earthquake. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, about the weight of a talent, and men blasphemed God because of the plagues and because of the hail. For the plague thereof was exceeding great. Oh, you say, brother, a bit of an anticlimax, isn't it? A wee tiny bit of an anticlimax. God is throwing thunderbolts and lightning and turning up the sun and sending cancerous sores and doing all these other things, and the bowl judgment finishes with a hailstorm. That's why I read in Job, you know. Job opened up, the Lord opened up to Job, you see, 1 or 2 little heavenly pictures. He says, Job, I'll let you see my hail warehouses. They're not cannonballs and missiles and shells. They're hail warehouses. stored up against the day of judgment. I believe that's literal. And God, when he decides, is going to send these hailstorms down from heaven. The greatest hailstorm in history happened in Kansas in America only 20 years ago. Modern history. The hailstones weighed about a pound each, half a kilogram. And there was a minimum $2 billion worth of damage done. That's in one city. The weight of these hailstones, in case you don't know, up here or online what a talent is, putting that in modern weight. A talent in modern weight is 45 kg. That's even bigger than your wife's suitcase going on holidays. Every single hailstone weighed about 45 kilograms. Can you imagine that dropping 100,000 miles from space? I'll tell you, I wouldn't kill a man, that would squash him. That's the magnitude. Little wonder I've been saying, that's the greatness. That's the scale. That's the size of our God.